Okay, I just started recording to the cloud, so ready whenever you guys are.
Okay, thank you, Bill. We'll give it a couple more minutes just for everyone to hop on. A few minutes before 10, so.
Nicole, I think we've got everyone on our side. I see Adam and David have joined as well.
Okay, great.
All right, then. It sounds like everyone is ready. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and call this session of the Cedro Woolley Hearing Examiner to order. For the record, today is Tuesday, March 21st, 2023 at 10 o'clock a.m. We have one item on our agenda today, number CUP 2022-274, a request for a conditional use permit or CUP to construct a new galvanization facility along with required parking and infrastructure located across 4 parcels in the vicinity of 616 Sunset Park Drive. My name is Alex Seidels. I'm a hearing examiner with Sound Law Center, whom the city has selected to hold certain land use hearings like this one. It will be my role today to collect evidence in the form of exhibits and testimony to determine whether the proposal complies with the city comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, and critical areas ordinances. To that end, I received and reviewed 15 exhibits in advance of the hearing. These include the staff report, the CUP application, the site plan, including the revised site plan, the project report, SEPA checklist, and the city's mitigated determination of non-significance or MDNS. I reviewed comments from the city and Department of Ecology and the applicant's response to those comments, as well as one public comment submitted with the staff report. I will admit those 15 exhibits into the record at this time. I'll keep the same exhibit numbering that appears in the staff report, so that would be exhibits A through O. In addition, I also received a further 11 public comments this morning. These too are admitted into the record. I will put all 11 of those comments into a single exhibit, which we will call Exhibit P. Should anyone have additional exhibits they would like admitted into the record, please let me know when it is your opportunity to testify, and I will go ahead and address admitting additional exhibits at that time. Speaking of testimony, all testimony will be under oath or affirmation because, were my decision to be appealed, the recording of today's hearing, along with the admitted exhibits and my written decision, would serve as the foundation for any such appeal. So I may ask questions of those that are testifying. I'm not trying to trip anybody up. I'm just trying to ensure that I have a clear understanding of the proposal in front of me so that after the record closes, I can produce a decision that is hopefully clear and legally defensible. The order that we typically follow for these hearings, and I think we'll be following this order today, is first we will hear from city staff, who will provide an overview of the proposal, along with any recommendations the city may have. Following that, we will hear from the applicant to see if there's any additional information they feel that myself or the members of the public should be aware of in advance of my decision being issued. After that, members of the public will have an opportunity to testify. And finally, following public testimony, we will turn back to the applicant and the city as necessary for any response. Everyone wishing to testify will have an opportunity, but just like at an in-person hearing, this will not involve question and answer sessions or objections or multiple speaking opportunities for members of the public. With one exception, I can ask questions, and in fact, I expect that I will be asking questions of most or all of the witnesses that we have testifying today. So with that, I think we can get started. As I said, our first round will come from the city. So who will be appearing on behalf of the city this morning?
That will be me, Nicole McGowan, Assistant Planner.
Good morning, Ms. McGowan. Will you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give here today will be the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. And will you state and spell your name for the record? And by the way, the reason I ask that is it's the audio recording that's the official source of the transcript. I realize here on Zoom we can see each other's names, but that doesn't work for the audio. So could you go ahead and spell, please?
Nicole McGowan, NICOLEMCGOWAN,
And what is your role with the city, Ms. McGowan?
Assistant Planner for the city.
Did you say assistant planner? All right. Why don't you go ahead and well, actually, I have a couple questions for you first. First, did my summary of the exhibits track with what you were hoping I would review in advance of the hearing?
Yes.
Okay, and other than those 11 comments that came in this morning, have there been any other exhibits that came in at the last minute?
No other exhibits at this time, no.
Okay, and have there been any appeals filed of the SEPA MDNS?
No.
Okay, and do you have a PowerPoint today that you want to make an exhibit?
I don't have a PowerPoint, just gonna be speaking.
All right, well, let's go ahead and hear you speak then.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so a pre-application meeting was where this permitting process began. So the city held the meeting with the project applicant back on March 30th, 2022. Originally, staff provided their comments on the proposed galvanizing facility under the impression that it would be a simple processing type use, which is an outright allowed use in the industrial zone. During the pre-application meeting, it was also discussed that a boundary line adjustment would be needed to join all of the parcels in the industrial site into one to avoid any issues from structures crossing property lines. After the meeting, the project applicant put a building permit application package together for the proposed galvanizing building, the parking, and other associated infrastructure, and they submitted it to the city on July 20th, 2022. The application was determined to be complete on July 22nd, and a letter of complete application was sent to the applicant. A notice of application and SEPA comment period was also prepared and scheduled to be published and posted on site on July 27th. Then the planning department began review of the application materials. There were several indicators in the SEPA checklist that they provided that the galvanizing process does involve handling of hazardous materials. We found that many of the answers to the questions in the checklist regarding the handling of hazardous waste were vague or unclear. I have a few examples. So for instance, in section 2 of the checklist, for air, the question asks what types of emissions to the air would result from the proposal during construction, operation, and maintenance when the project is completed. If any, generally describe and give approximate quantities if known. And the applicant responded, once complete, fume emission from the galvanizing kettle will be present. These fumes are mitigated by emission capture and removal through a baghouse. Minor amounts of dust could be generated during construction. Emissions will be from vehicle exhaust and dust during construction. Automobile exhaust will exist after the project is complete. Emission quantities are unknown, but are not expected to be unusual for this type of facility. So the applicant did not specify what type or quantities of fume emission would be coming from the galvanizing kettle, which was kind of alarming. Another example is section 7 of the environmental health portion of the checklist. So question A asks, are there any environmental health hazards, including exposure to toxic chemicals, risk of fire and explosion, spill, or hazardous waste that could occur as a result of this proposal, if so described. The applicant responded, chemical process tanks present thermal and corrosive health hazards by direct contact. Hazardous waste will be on site, but presents orders of magnitude health hazards lower than the process chemicals. The answer was somewhat confusing for staff to understand, though it was clear that personnel would be exposed to chemicals and other hazardous materials. Also noting that the applicant failed to note what kind of hazardous waste would be produced. There were several other answers to the questions in the checklist that were similarly vague or somehow alerted planning staff into researching further into the galvanizing process. And after doing that research, it was clear that galvanizing involves hazardous materials, namely zinc. Because Sedro-Woolley Municipal Code, specifically 1704030, holds that processing of hazardous materials or processing activities that result in the production of hazardous materials are specifically excluded from the processing definition. So even though processing is an outright permitted use in the industrial zone, when hazardous materials are involved, then the proposal cannot be considered an outright permitted use anymore. And instead, the project would first need to be permitted as a conditional use prior to building permit review and approval. So in response to that, planning staff redacted the letter of complete application, and we canceled the publication of the notice of application and SEPA comment period. The applicant was notified that they would need to get conditional use permit approval first before any more headway could be made with the building permit review. And planning staff also asked for additional information to be provided about the galvanizing process and some specific information about the Sedro-Woolley project itself, so that staff could perform a more informed review of the application materials. So the applicant submitted the conditional use permit application materials on August 16th, 2022. That's Exhibit B of the staff report. Upon receiving all the required materials, a letter of complete application was sent to the applicant on October 19th, 2022. Then we issued a notice of application and SEPA comment period on November 1st, with a deadline for public comments set for November 15th. That notice of application and SEPA comment period is Exhibit E of the staff report. We received 2 public comments during the comment period, one from the DOE, which is Exhibit F, and then one from Mr. Paul Woodmansey, which is Exhibit G of the staff report. So the Department of Ecology commented that the applicant would need to apply for Ecology's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, Industrial Stormwater General Permit. It was later confirmed by our engineering department that stormwater does discharge off-site into Brickyard Creek after going through city systems. So the applicant would need to obtain the permit unless they were approved for an exemption by the DOE. The DOE also had concerns that the applicant had not addressed any process wastewater generation or discharge to sanitary sewer, and noted that if sewer discharge of processed wastewater was being considered, the applicant should address it in the SEPA checklist, and they would need to apply for a process wastewater discharge permit through the DOE. And then for Paul Woodmansey's comment, he spoke of the toxic nature of galvanizing plants, specifically in regard to the associated environmental issues like air quality and wastewater treatment. He also made mention that the plant would be located at the forefront of the city, and though the property is zoned industrial, he felt it would not fit well in that location, particularly with the single-family residential area to the west of the site and the urban village mixed-use area to the east. Moving forward, on November 4th, 2022, the city staff organized a tour of the existing galvanizing facility that Seattle Galvanizing has located in Arlington. Though it was understood that the Arlington facility is more than double the size of what's been proposed for Sedro-Woolley and processes much larger materials, staff found that the tour would be a useful educational opportunity to see the galvanizing facility and the process firsthand and to have any questions answered. On the tour, there were several points of interest noted. So first, the Arlington facility is an open air type of facility. So the doors to the facility are kept open, at least they were while we were there. They were open the whole time. And it was clear that fumes of some sort from the process were escaping to the outside. There was also this blanket of orange dust, presumably rust, covering the site and neighboring industrial properties as well. Also, the laydown area for materials was overlaying the parking area, which was originally intended for on-site employee parking. And because of that, the employees of the facility instead park on the street, which has been a hazard for, especially for the large trucks trying to maneuver around the area. Several collisions due to that issue have been reported. And then third, workers were seen drilling and cutting into materials outside of the facility. And the stormwater system appeared to have been backed up at the time. So much of the debris from that work was seen kind of floating in the water, puddled up on the asphalt outside of the facility. So on November 4th, 2022, a transmit was sent to local departments requesting staff comments on the proposed facility and infrastructure. So the staff comments provided in response are found in Exhibit H of the staff report. The fire department comments indicated that they would need an appropriately placed automatic sprinkler system according to current IFC standards for Group H occupancies. They would need a fire department approved connection for such a system, as well as appropriate fire lanes, turnaround and access gates to the facility. The engineering department indicated that the applicant would need to apply for the DOE's NPDES Industrial Stormwater General Permit previously mentioned. The DOE had already commented that they needed that. Additionally, because the galvanizing process involves the use of zinc, a hazardous waste in the production process, appropriate source and operational control BMPs would be required to minimize the possibility of zinc entering stormwater and running off, exiting the site. So the solid waste department comments indicated that they would need separate garbage and recycling services from the other businesses in the industrial site. They also requested project-specific information on what specific byproducts would be stored on site, where they would be stored, an estimate of the maximum amounts of each of those byproducts that would be stored on site at any given time, where those certain byproducts would be sent for recycling or sale, how certain byproducts would be recycled or reused, and to indicate how those practices would comply with Skagit County and Washington State regulations for solid waste materials, moderate risk and hazardous waste handling. The solid waste department also requested a copy of a report or a letter explaining how solid waste materials are currently handled at the Arlington galvanization facility. Planning department comments indicated that revisions to the Cedar-Woolley project report provided with the application materials would be necessary. That project report is in Exhibit D. The requested revisions included requests for provision for handling and disposal of processed wastewater, as well as provision for handling and disposal of ground debris from sweeping or mopping the facility. We also asked for revisions to the site plan submitted with the application materials to include the owner's name, parcel numbers, vehicle circulation on site, the required parking stalls, 7 parking stalls for the new building, including 1 ADA accessible stall. They had existing parking on site, but it's already in use by the buildings there, so we would not be allowing them to use those. We wanted to see proposed location for outdoor material storage, proposed location for a dumpster, the location and dimensions of storm systems, and dimensions and depth of any fill proposed on site. And then lastly, we asked that the SEPA checklist be revised to include references to the requested updates in the project report. And then all other staff comments were incorporated into the planning comment letter, and we had clear instructions on how staff would like to see those comments addressed in the next submittal from the applicant. So in response, on December 22nd and 28th of 2022, the applicant submitted revised application materials. On the 22nd, they included a response to the DOE's comment letter. And they, in the response, the applicant states that there would be no exterior storage of coated materials and that the facility would be designed, constructed, and operated such that industrial materials will not contact stormwater. And therefore, the project will qualify for Ecology's conditional certificate of no exposure. They also state that the proposed galvanizing process is a net consumer of water and does not generate any regulatory defined process wastewater, and therefore a process wastewater discharge permit would not be needed. Then on the 28th, the submittal there included a revised site plan, which is Exhibit J of the staff report, a revised SEPA checklist, which is Exhibit K, and a planning comments response letter. So the applicant did not revise the project report as staff had requested, but the planning comment response letter they submitted does detail how the applicant attempted to address staff comments. They also did not provide the solid waste department with a copy of the report or letter explaining how solid waste materials are currently handled at the Arlington plant, as they felt that they shouldn't have to because it was a separate project in a different jurisdiction. So then a second transmit was sent to local departments on January 5th, 2023, requesting department confirmation on satisfaction with the applicant's response to staff comments. This was to determine whether or not we would move forward with a SEPA threshold determination. Fire and wastewater departments confirmed that they were satisfied and ready to move forward. However, engineering, solid waste, Skagit County Health, and the DOE responded that they still had some issues that they wanted addressed by the applicant. So the engineering department was concerned that stormwater from the site does discharge into city storm drain systems that discharge into Brickyard Creek. And given the potential for zinc contamination in stormwater, engineering was specifically concerned that the applicant had not proposed a method for enhanced water quality treatment of site runoff prior to discharge from the site. Engineering and the Department of Ecology both indicated that the applicant had not applied for the DOE's conditional certificate of no exposure, which is necessary for an exemption from the requirements of the NPDES Industrial Stormwater General Permit. Solid Waste and Skagit County Health combined their responses, and they indicated that the applicant had not demonstrated compliance with state requirements for hazardous waste handling and disposal requirements specific to the quantity of waste generated by the facility. And that's under Chapter 173-303 of the WAC. Additionally, there was concern that the applicant had not provided project-specific information regarding byproduct production, storage, handling, disposal, and recycling practices. The department responses with the above concerns can be found in Exhibit M of the staff report. So after careful consideration of all that, planning staff determined that though there were still concerns to be addressed, they could be addressed through applying a number of specific conditions under the SEPA threshold determination, that MDNS, and the conditions of approval for the CUP. So on, let's see, on February 2nd, 2023, a SEPA mitigated determination of non-significance, or MDNS, was issued, and a deadline for appeals to that threshold was set for February 16th. We did not receive any appeals to that MDNS. So it's been a challenge getting the applicants to submit cohesive reports, plans, documents, etc., according to staff direction. And because of that, staff was uncomfortable proceeding to public hearing. To get to this point, we needed to create a list of very specific conditions to assure that the project would meet comprehensive plan and other applicable requirements if the conditional use permit were approved by the hearing examiner. Before we have an approvable project, additional provisions are absolutely needed, specifically for enhanced water quality treatment prior to discharge and appropriate stormwater drainage that demonstrates compliance with DOE and city regulations. Additional provision for site improvements associated with parking facilities and on-site loading and offloading facilities. Additional project-specific provision for byproduct production, storage, handling, disposal and recycling practices, and demonstration of compliance with state requirements under the chapter 173-303 WAC, as well as city regulations for hazardous waste handling and disposal requirements specific to the quantity of waste generated by this facility. There's still a lot of unknowns at play here, and we've had a generally unsupportive reaction from the public about the idea of having this kind of facility in our city. So staff was happy to see the amount of public participation for this hearing. We received a good number of public comments leading up to today, and those have been sent to you. So in conclusion, the city recommends approval of the CUP subject to the conditions listed in the MD&S and the CUP approval document, should this be approved by you, the hearing examiner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGowan. I too noted the large volume of staff comments, particularly in Exhibit M, which is the final round of comments. At that point, the applicant had turned in, essentially its final responses to the earlier objections, and staff was kind of getting the last word there. As you pointed out, several of the staff who wrote in essentially said, well, we still have concerns about this project, and the materials that have been sent in are not responsive to those concerns. In particularly, I'm thinking here of the memos from Leo Jacobs regarding solid waste. I think I'd like to turn to and is Mr. Jacobs here? Is he planning to testify today?
I don't think Leo is here today, no.
All right. To the best of your knowledge, is he recommending approval or denial? Have you had a chance to talk to him?
I believe he is leaning more toward denial on this one.
All right. But the final recommendation, I take it, comes from you? Did you say yes? Ms. McGowan, it's my understanding that the final staff recommendation comes from you. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. So it seems like you are essentially, maybe I'm putting this too strongly, but it seems like you're essentially overriding Leo Jacobs' recommendation. Can you walk me through why the concerns that he expresses in Exhibit M you don't think are a basis to deny the project, or at least to hold off until we have more information?
If I'm being honest, we were pretty pressured by the applicant to move forward to public hearing with this. So we were looking at those concerns from Leo and Skagit County Health. There were some things that were still not answered, but based on the quantity of generators, so we weren't sure under which provisions under the state requirements would apply to them.
Right.
So we tried our best to condition under the MD&S and create conditions for, in the event of CUP approval, to say that they will need to address those state requirements and show how they are going to meet those.
Frankly, Ms. McGowan, I too am not certain which category this project will ultimately fall into under the state regulations. And I don't know that we have anything in the record that answers that. I think the closest we come is Ecology's final email. This is incorporated into Exhibit M. Give me one moment here. So this would be from Sylvia Graham, dated January 9. And she essentially says that Ecology is not certain whether this project will meet the requirements for the conditional certificate of no exposure. Instead, the facility has to apply for that exemption, and maybe it will be granted and maybe it won't. And presumably if it's not granted, then they have to go out and get their industrial stormwater general. It does look like Ecology is satisfied with regards to process wastewater. But ecology never weighs in, at least not that I can see, on the issue of solid waste. It looks like Mr. Jacobs is kind of alone out there worrying about solid waste. Did you ever have a conversation with ecology about solid waste?
Not about solid waste, no.
Did ecology specifically indicate that ecology was not concerned about solid waste, or that they felt like they had no jurisdiction over solid waste, or why did the solid waste issue never come up with ecology?
Well, they never made comment about it. Yeah, we never discussed it, so I'm not sure where they where
Okay.
were with that. Let's see. I'm trying to remember back. Yeah, the only conversation we had was regarding the process wastewater and the industrial stormwater general permit.
Okay. All right. So then with regards to solid waste, it seems like Mr. Jacobs is the only reviewing expert that has weighed in. He says the following, and again, I'm in Exhibit M. This is Mr. Jacobs' memo dated January 12th. He says, according to the state of Washington WAC codes, all businesses must comply with Chapter 173-303 WAC, dangerous waste regulations, when they operate in Washington state. Even if they, and by they, he means the applicant, even if they are claiming that they will recycle or reuse much of their hazardous materials, there are always some wastes and sludges that are produced that designate as dangerous wastes per WAC 173-303. If they meet the conditionally exempt small quantity generator, CESQG, as outlined in the WAC, part of those conditions is they have to follow the regulations and have record keeping to demonstrate they are properly handling and disposing of their wastes. If a business is a CESQG, they're still regulated under solid waste regulations as a CESQG. Our local Skagit County Code, SCC 12.16.220 and 12.16.240, cover more details for how CESQG businesses have to meet the regulations. I would say they, at a minimum, need to address those codes before we go further in the process. So I recognize that solid waste is regulated by the state as well as by the county. I think what I'm hearing from you, Ms. McGowan, is we haven't heard from the state as to what category the state thinks this project will fall into. And Mr. Jacobs seems to be indicating he also doesn't have enough information to figure out what category they will fall into. Even if they fall into the least regulated category, there are still requirements they have to meet, and he would like to see those requirements met. Now, you said during your testimony a moment ago, Ms. McGowan, you think that this can all be addressed through the conditions in the MDNS and the recommended conditions of approval for the CUP. So let me take a look at the conditions in the MDNS here with regards to solid waste. And if you can, so here's one at number 8. Obtain and comply with conditions of a solid waste discharge permit, industrial user, to publicly owned treatment works as may be required. Sorry, that's a state waste discharge permit. So that's a stormwater thing. That's not solid waste. Comply with county, state, and federal regulations for handling of hazardous materials and disposal of hazardous materials. I don't know, Ms. McGowan. I don't see a condition in the MDNS specific to solid waste. Let me take a look at your recommended conditions of approval for the CUP itself. Obtain necessary permits. Yeah, again, I don't see much treatment, Ms. McGowan, in the recommended conditions of approval on solid waste. Can you direct me to to something in either the MDNS or the recommended conditions in the staff report that speak to Mr. Jacobs' concerns? Because if ecology hasn't touched them and they're not in the conditions, then these seem to be kind of unanswered objections floating out there.
Yeah, I suppose the closest one would be that number 9 in the MDNS, comply with county, state, and federal regulations for handling of hazardous materials and disposal of hazardous materials and waste.
Okay, so let me see what Mr. Jacobs had to say about that. Sorry about this. I'm not in my usual computer here, so I have to kind of like scroll through things more than I usually do. One moment. Well, now I can't find Mr. Jacobs' final memo. Ms. McGowan, do you have all the exhibits in one giant PDF? Because that's how they are in my version here. And I was hoping you could give me a PDF page number for the final memo of Leo Jacobs.
Yeah, 1 second. Let's see.
Just trying to move this along here. Sorry, everyone. Had it a minute ago.
Just a moment, I'll get it for you.
This is his January 12 memo that I'm looking for.
It's page 165.
Great, thanks. Ah, yes, great. All right, so the condition that you pointed towards was that one in the MDNS that basically just says, you know, comply with all state and local codes on solid waste.
Yeah, I think our
Right, but the problem that Mr. Jacobs is having here is like, he doesn't know what category they're falling into, right? He's saying like, if they meet the conditionally exempt small quantity generator, then they have to follow the following rules, but he doesn't know whether they meet that or not. I feel like he doesn't have enough information about, you know, these wastes and sludges that he's concerned about. And, you know, I certainly don't have that information either.
Right.
Well, I think what we'll do here is, I have some more questions for you on other topics, Ms. McGowan, and we'll be hearing from the applicant. So maybe the applicant will have some answers for us on this solid waste issue and how they're planning to handle that. And maybe we can, you know, have something in the record there that will help me make a decision on this. And if the applicant is not able to point to any kind of solid waste plan or answer some of these questions in Mr. Jacobs' January 12th report, maybe we can circle back and have a discussion about that. All right. So the next topic I wanted to bring up with you, Ms. McGowan, was odor. In those public comments that came in this morning, the 11 public comments that we have put into Exhibit P, there was a recurring theme about odor from these galvanizing plants. At least one that I saw specifically pointed to the Arlington facility and said, you know, you can smell that thing. And when you were describing your site visit of November 4th, you also indicated that there was an odor. I understand that the proposed facility for Sedro-Woolley will have a bag house. What are your thoughts on odor, Ms. McGowan? And I ask because I don't see it addressed in the staff report.
Sure. So they do propose to have a bag house. The Arlington facility has a bag house as well. But I think part of the issue with the odor is because they keep the doors open there. At this facility, part of the conditions that we've made have, we're going to require them to keep the doors closed at all times unless they're moving things inside and out of the facility.
Okay,
So,
where can I see that condition? Let me take a look here. I'm looking at MDNS. I don't see anything to keep the door shut. Let me look at proposed CUP. I don't see any conditions, Ms. McGowan, that say they have to keep their doors shut.
One moment. The MDNS.
It's condition 13.
All right. Condition 13, submit a site plan with building permit application materials showing the proposed location for garbage and recycling separate from other businesses. Well, that can't be right. Maybe it's MDNS 13.
Correct.
All work, including cutting, drilling, grinding, processing, treating, shall occur inside the building. Here we go. Doors to the facility shall remain closed at all times, except when bringing materials into and out of the building. All right. So I'm not sure who provided that citation, but yes, I see that condition. All right, Ms. McGowan, if they keep the door shut, why do you believe that that will satisfy the odor concerns?
Well, thinking it will keep most of the fumes from escaping out into the air. Hopefully, I'm no expert on how the baghouse works per se, but keeping everything contained would keep everything from escaping out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see there is a recommended condition that they have to comply with the Northwest Clean Air Agency regulations. I believe, Northwest Clean Air Agency has regulations pertaining to odor. Do you happen to know, Ms. McGowan?
I don't know specifics on it, just that they do have odor control.
All right. So, presumably if there's a clean air agency rule that says, don't cause an odor nuisance, they would have to comply with that anyways. But if that regulation doesn't exist, I guess my concern would be, what if shutting the doors isn't enough, right? What if the fumes continue to leak out and bother the surrounding properties? Do you share that concern, Ms. McGowan, or am I just kind of borrowing trouble here based on the public comments?
Definitely share that concern. Yes.
Well, what should we do about odor then?
Let's see. Oh, I noticed John Coleman has his hand up wanting to speak.
Well, is he part of the city staff?
Yes, he's planning director.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, let's bookmark you for now, Ms. McGowan. We will put on Mr. Coleman. Mr. Coleman, will you take your microphone and activate it and raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony today you give will be the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Will you state and spell your name for the audio record, please?
My name is John Coleman, Johncoleman.
And I heard you are the planning director. Is that accurate?
Correct.
All right. What have you got for us, Mr. Coleman?
So I think Nicole's represented this very well so far. I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to add the bag house is for collecting the fumes from the zinc bath. And I'm sure the applicant can clarify. There are several other vats of chemicals that do not have any odor containment to them. There's also, bits of processing, and sweeping and various other activities that happen inside the facility. I'm unaware if they're going to be drilling or buffing or what they're going to be doing at this facility, but that will also create airborne particles. So the odors and the particles that are released into the air, whether it by sweeping or by using a blower machine to blow materials around, as we viewed at the at their other facility, they have somebody that's constantly sweeping and or using a leaf blower basically to keep the floors clean. They indicated that they have somebody doing that work during the entire time that the facility is open. So there is concerns about those airborne particles and odors leaving the building. We do not have any clear idea of how those materials and how those chemical smells are to be treated, abated, or otherwise mitigated. That is a concern of staff. We were relying on the Northwest Clean Air Agency to weigh in on this issue, to address how these things need to be handled, if they need to be handled at all. We don't want to step on their toes, but we have not received any comment from NOACA, Northwest Clean Air Agency.
Is it the
but-
clean? Oh, sorry, sir. Go ahead.
I just want to reiterate, yes, it is a concern of staff, and it does not seem to be addressed in the project materials submitted by the applicant.
Is it the practice of the Clean Air Agency to submit comments? Is that something they do, or do they not have a process for that, or what?
You know, we gave them notice, and we are under the assumption, and I want to underline assumption, that the applicant will need to apply for Northwest Clean Air Agency permits and review. There are other facilities in Arlington, so I believe that's actually under a different clean air agency. So I don't know if they have a relationship with the Northwest Clean Air Agency.
And to the best of your knowledge, Mr. Coleman, does Northwest Clean Air Agency specifically regulate odors?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's accurate, then presumably a clean air agency permit would mean you can't cause odors, and if you do cause odors, you're in violation of the permit. Am I understanding correctly their permitting process, at least as you understand it?
Now, the way I understand it is they're going to regulate chemicals and materials, you know, such as, for example, not in this instance, but you know, you need to have a clean air agency permit to do a paint spray. That's not something that they're doing at this facility, but they would issue a permit for something like that. I also understand that if there's complaints about odors coming from various processes, you can contact the Northwest Clean Air Agency and they will investigate. Now, the structure of their codes and requirements, we don't fully understand if Clean Air Agency would regulate these types of uses or not. But we wanted to make sure that they're aware of the process, and if there are, and we would like to hear from them, but we can't make them respond to requests for comments.
No, obviously not. I guess my concern would be if the city is relying on the Clean Air Agency to regulate all forms of air pollution, which in my mind includes odor. But if the Clean Air Agency doesn't have a process for that or doesn't have a requirement for that, then it would seem that the air agency would be relying on the city to regulate and make sure that there was not an odor problem. So I worry that this odor issue may end up getting lost somewhere between the city on the one side and the Clean Air Agency on the other side. I would feel a lot more comfortable if we'd heard from the Clean Air Agency and either they said, oh yes, we regulate odor and, you know, we'll be inspecting the facility to make sure that it, you know, doesn't cause an odor problem. And here's our, you know, procedure for if there are odor complaints. Or on the other hand, if they just said odor, we don't touch it, that's a city problem. I would feel a lot more comfortable if I knew exactly where this odor issue was supposed to land. Can you help me figure that out, Mr. Coleman?
I can agree with you 100%. We are at a loss of how we're supposed to address this issue. And we haven't received enough information from the applicant to really determine what the process is. And without input from the applicant and from Clean Air Agency, we are very concerned that the odor issue may get lost in the shuffle as you described.
Okay, all right. I think that's all of my questions for the city on odor. I'm sure the applicant is listening to this with horror. Don't worry, applicant, your turn will come and you can address all of these issues and supply any information or suggestions on the things that you've heard. And I'll have these same questions for you as well. But let me just move through my list here, see what else I've got for the city while I have Ms. McGowan and Mr. Coleman on the hook. I don't think I have anything further on odor and solid waste, Ms. McGowan. I do have an issue. This was raised in the public comments this morning. Access to the site. It's my understanding, based on the revised site plans in Exhibit J, that there's going to be a driveway onto Sunset Drive. But one of the comments says Sunset Drive is a private road, and the comment sort of hints that there may be a problem with the Sunset Owner Association regarding access to that road. Has the city looked at the road access issue?
Not at this point. That would be something we would look at with building permit application submittals.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. It's a little bit premature to think about that now. Let me just take a look at the conditions in the MDNS and the recommended conditions. I'm not against kicking the access issue down to the building permit level. I think that's an appropriate place for it. But let me just make sure that they are required to get a building permit. Obviously, they are by code, but let me just make sure here that that's kind of captured in the proposed conditions. Yeah, I guess it would be proposed condition number 1, obtain the necessary permits for site approval. All right, so Ms. McGowan, let's say hypothetically, let's say that this public commenter is correct. Let's say Sunset Drive is a Sunset Drive is a private road, and for whatever reason, the property owners that make decisions for Sunset Drive, whoever that is, whether it's an association or some other entity, let's say that they withhold permission for the applicant to have this driveway. Would that prevent the applicant from getting a building permit?
We would look at during the review just to see, what other options there would be. Mina Properties is the owner of the entire Snelson property. So they would likely propose a different access point. See where else we might be able to do that if issues come up with access.
But access would be, kind of a criteria for getting a building permit. There's no such thing as a building permit, but no access, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, all right. One of the public comments this morning also raised the idea that the Sunset Owner Association has a requirement for green space in its bylaws. I realize that the city is not the enforcer of the Sunset Owner Association bylaws. Were you aware that there was a potential issue along these lines, or what is your understanding of that whole issue?
Can you repeat that bit about green space?
Yes, I myself am a little bit unclear, and this came in like an hour before the hearing, so I haven't given it a huge amount of thought. But one of the comments I understood to be saying the Sunset Owner Association has a requirement somewhere in its bylaws for green space. I haven't read the bylaws. I don't know if that's true. Has the city? I mean, I guess. You know what, it's probably not fair to ask you that question. Ms. McGowan, you're not the property owner. I'll save that question for the applicant. So I'll withdraw that question. The last one I think I do have for you, Ms. McGowan, is a couple of the comments have raised the issue that there's a pond on the adjacent property. Evidently, trumpeter swans use this pond in the course of their migration. I think I heard you say that stormwater from this site discharges into Brickyard Creek, and I believe Brickyard Creek then discharges into that pond. Can you talk to me about how the proposal interacts with that pond on the adjacent property?
Well, we do know that they are going to be required to have a private system for stormwater discharge. I know that the engineering department has asked for source and control BMPs. Let me look at the engineering comments here real quick. So
My understanding was that they were going to be discharging into the city's stormwater system, and there was some debate as to whether they needed an industrial stormwater general permit or not. But I did think that the wastewater, I should say wastewater, the stormwater from the galvanizing plant was going to go into the city system. But now I think I just heard you say a moment ago that they would have a private system. So now I'm confused.
Let's see.
I can clarify that if you'd like.
Is that Mr. Coleman again?
Yes.
All right, let's pause Ms. McGowan again and put Mr. Coleman back on to talk about stormwater.
So to the best of my knowledge, there is a private stormwater system for the Sunset Park Industrial Association, whatever their name may be. And there is a stormwater pond to which each of the properties stormwater flows to. From that stormwater pond, any overflow would enter the city system, which discharges into Brickyard Creek nearby to the west.
Okay.
That is my best understanding of the system operation, stormwater system operation for that area.
Great, that's very helpful, Mr. Coleman. So it seems like conceivably stormwater from this facility will be going into Brickyard Creek, and I guess from Brickyard Creek into this pond that the swans use. Is that also correct?
I believe the pond that's referred to is the stormwater pond on site. And from that stormwater pond, it discharges to the city system and Brickyard Creek. And the
Got it.
conveyance, the exact conveyance, I'm unsure of. I haven't looked at the engineering.
So if I'm following you correctly, it sounds like the swans are sort of choosing to land on a stormwater pond, and presumably that pond wouldn't exist at all if it hadn't been built by people. Let me just take a look at the public comment. I want to make sure I'm kind of fairly characterizing what this person said, because I don't know if they're going to comment or not.
I believe they may be online.
All right. Well, hopefully that's true, so they can kind of walk me through where they observe these birds. All right. Well, I think I have enough for now, Mr. Coleman, and hopefully we'll hear from that public commenter, perhaps with some rebuttal to your testimony on how this all works. All right. Well, that was all of my questions for the city. I guess I have kind of a standard question for Ms. McGowan. Since this application was deemed complete, have there been any changes to the zoning code or comprehensive plan that would affect the proposal?
No, there haven't.
Okay. And based on what we've heard from Mr. Coleman, I'll save this question for the end. All right, that's it for the city. Unless the city has another witness they're intending to put on.
Not at this time.
Okay, well, let's have you standing by, city. Maybe I will put you back on for rebuttal to whatever we learn from the applicant or members of the public. But for now, let's move on to the applicant. So who is appearing on behalf of our applicant this morning?
Well, we got three of us here today. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, guys. Are all three of you planning to testify?
I'll probably do the majority, but these guys could do the intro since this is the owner and this is one of the principal employees.
All right, three gentlemen, let's all raise your hands since it sounds like each of you may be testifying. Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give here today will be the truth?
Yes, I do. Yes.
All right, thank you. And will the first of our witnesses please state and spell your name, please, and describe your role in this whole process?
Sure. First name Hadi, H-A-D-I. Last name M-I-R-Z-A-I. Role is the president of the company.
Do you say M-I-R-Z-A-I?
Correct.
All right, and you are the president. All right, go ahead, sir.
First name Milo, Milo, last name Arefi.
What, you got to go again on the last name, please.
Aref as in Frank, I as in Indigo. VP of Operations here.
All right, VP of Ops. All right, who else?
I'm Greg Allen, GREGALLAN.
Got it. And what
And
is
I'm
your,
a-
Mr. Allen?
I'm consulting engineer.
Okay. All right, so who will be going first on behalf of the applicant team?
We'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and dive right into it.
All right, so who is this speaking? Is this Mr. Allen right now?
Greg Allen.
All right, go
Right.
ahead, Mr. Allen.
And I'm a professional engineer, chemical engineer with over 40 years experience in design, construction, regulatory compliance, and went from fire code through air and water discharge, including the design of those systems and the permitting. So I've done a lot of work with metal finishing facilities that are got a lot more stuff going on than what Seattle Galvanizing has going on. Worked with a lot of regulators from the federal down to local on all types of building, environmental, and anyway, so I'm very familiar with these. So a lot of these questions you had for the city, I can certainly give you some background from professional experience in a lot of these things. But the first thing I wanted to get into is that the city tends to conflate hazardous waste with hazardous materials. Two different things. Hazardous materials are defined by the International Fire Code or the Federal Department of Transportation, and there's other avenues of defining particular hazardous materials depending on the application. Hazardous waste is defined by originally a RCRA and then delegated to the state, in our case, State Department of Ecology. And to give you an idea of the significant difference between the two is that the International Fire Code uses rat bioassay for both dermal inhalation and ingestion. The State Department of Ecology uses a fish bioassay. And needless to say, common sense tells you that fish are significantly more sensitive than rats are. So we got these orders of magnitude different. Now, a hazardous waste cannot be a hazardous waste unless it's also a solid waste by the ecology definitions. But not all solid wastes are hazardous waste because they don't necessarily designate. So the solid waste stream can be packaging, the regular industrial garbage, if you will. And hazardous waste clearly does not go into the solid waste disposal stream. That Department of Ecology and the Dangerous Waste Regulations, you've had the citation, the WAC 173-303, which I know very well. It just doesn't occur because all generators know the repercussions of the hazardous waste stream getting into the solid waste stream. It's just unfathomable that anybody even contemplate doing that. The other thing that has been conflated is the hazardous waste processing and hazardous materials processing, and the term processing. The proposal here is not processing hazardous waste. The hazardous waste is not, the company will be a generator of hazardous waste, but it does not process hazardous waste. The 3 process tanks, as a good example, are not hazardous waste, and as they sit in those tanks and are somehow being processed. They're not. The parts are being processed through those dip tanks, and those parts are steel, which is not a hazardous waste. So those dip tanks that they're processing through, when they become spent, they're loaded, like the cleaner's loaded with oil, or whatever reason it just doesn't meet specification, can't be used anymore, then it's shut down. but that still, as it sits in the tank, shut down, not used for processing anymore, it's still not a hazardous waste until it is removed from the tank. Then it becomes a generated hazardous waste. Now that has to occur within, again, regulatory requirements for time frame. This stuff doesn't just sit around the facility because ecology doesn't allow it. It has time frame by which it has to be removed from the site, typically 90 days for large quantity generators, up to 180 days for small quantity generator. I believe that this facility is going to be a large quantity generator. Small, actually. Oh, will be small. I believe it will be. I see where it can be possible to be a small quantity generator. And then they'd have 180 days to get that small quantity, which is on the order of a couple, like a barrel, half a barrel to a barrel of waste. So this kind of give you the context of what's happening here. Now, the issue of odors, let me kind of go from last issue first. So, well, I've got it in my head here, is that the cleaner and the flux tank, the third tank, they're hot. They're 160 degrees. They're going to be putting off some vapor. And along with those vapors is going to be a certain amount, a little bit of the chemical that's in the tank. What the company intends to do is put a collection hoods on the tanks and go through a fume scrubber. And the interesting thing is, not only does that address any conceivable odor issue, it also, these fume scrubbers are what used to be termed a long time ago swamp coolers. So it cools the vapor down and doesn't have the in cold weather the foggy steam, the cloud that comes out the stack. That seems to alarm a lot of people, even though it's only water vapor and not different from a cloud. But the fume scrubber will eliminate that issue also, the perception issue. So those and that collection system and discharge system, like the bag house and the evacuation system for the kettle, is regulated by what is going to be the Northwest Clean Air Agency. I don't have much of any experience with the Northwest Clean Air Agency, but I have a lot with the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. I don't know how many permits I've applied for and received through them and gone through all the requirements. And while I'm thinking about it, there's no question that these air agencies have odor regulations, response, and enforcement. There's no question about it. Now, having said that, a lot of the facilities that I dealt with, particularly in the Auburn, Kent Valley area, and some of these facilities have like 5,000 gallon tanks and plating and anodizing, and they really got a lot of paint booths. One in particular, Skills Incorporated, is surrounded by subdivisions on two sides. I mean, right across the alleyway, back alleyway, and the fence are houses. So this company, following all of the regulations, fire code, mechanical code, hazardous waste regulations, air emissions regulations, does not have any nuisance issues with the neighbors, right? Like 20 feet across from their back wall to these houses. They're good neighbors. And in fact, I'd recommend that planning and fire, if they have contacts in the Regional Valley Fire Authority, contact them. And because there are a lot of metal finishers down there, which I've worked with, help build their facilities and mitigate all these issues. So it's not only Skills, there's Orion Industries, there's All New Glass, and I mean, I could probably come up with 10 or 12 if I think back 20, 30 years. And they're darn good neighbors and employers. And if they operated in a means that annoyed the neighbors, I wouldn't work with them. Who would? I mean, if you don't care about your neighbors, they're not going to care about me and get me paid. So I don't know what else to say. I'll leave that for now. But the other thing is, I do a lot of professional engineering reports for industrial wastewater discharge systems. and also a lot of risk analysis reports that accompany building permit applications for these kinds of facilities. And one phrase, and I'd be happy to copy it and turn it into you, later, is that in the mid-90s, the Seattle Fire Department was very concerned about the metal finishing industry in Seattle. All these same things, odors, discharges, all these same things we've been hearing about today. Now, in 1995, they commissioned a study and report from Factory Mutual on a nationwide study of the metal finishing industry, and with fire being the main peril to relate to the zoning and the land use and the categories. And what they found is that facilities that followed the then uniform building code, uniform fire code, Article 80 particularly, which is the predecessors to the international codes, those who followed those regulations didn't have any greater, in fact, even had less reports of these perils than in general industry. So general industry, you'd have a dumpster fire, or they'd have different things, and machine shops, clothes cleaners, painting, painting, all had more issues than the metal finishing industry. And that's what the Seattle Fire Department found. And from that point forward, the metal finishers in Seattle that I worked with and the city, we had pretty good relationships, as long as they knew that we were going to follow what we're supposed to follow and have good operations and maintenance. And so anyway, I was going to put that out. And I can get the text of my engineering report. I can get that to you if you want to leave the record open for administrative purposes. I can send that to you also. So I just want to get that out there, is that it's the same with the hazardous waste regulations. This notion that this hazardous waste is somehow just kind of getting out and crawling around and getting into stormwater or whatever, it just can't happen, because just to be blunt about it, just real careful. If it did, that's criminal activity that the state EPA, there's no tolerance for that, and all these business owners know that, and so they put in the proper storage facilities, they operate it correctly, they generate it, label their containers, and the really good ones they work with their fire departments to have coordinated training and response activities. So if anything did happen. Now, the other quick one I wanted to address is that this facility will almost certainly be a H4 occupancy. And to put that into perspective, H1 is just horrible, explosive. I mean, it's really wild stuff. H2 tends to be flammable. H3 is flammable and toxic. The H4 is not much more than a upgraded F2 occupancy. It has more density in the fire suppression system. It does require 20 minutes of fire water storage. So that's a significant issue there, is being able to take 20 minutes of the sprinkler water and hold it. And then it also requires the H4 area to have corrosion resistant coatings in it. And I'll have some added conditions that I would recommend that are not only, they're just flat out cost effective, and they're cheap insurance. They address a lot of issues at a marginal increase, a voluntary increase in cost in construction. And anyway, I guess why I could go into it is that when the facility ends up built such that the spill containment for the process tanks is a tank pit, and that pit is also sized and intended to hold that 20 minutes of fire suppression water. So you do them both at the same time. That pit, again, this would be a condition that I would suggest adding, is that those pits and walls all have what's called water stop or leak stop construction. And what happens is where a wall is poured onto a slab, there's or a slab overtops a wall. When it's poured, a rubber strip is put along the whole length of it that protrudes out the top of the wall or out of the slab. So then when it's poured, you've got the joint has this rubber strip in it that keeps it from being a leak path. So that's a common construction technique. And that's the way this facility is going to be built. If you want to make it a condition, fine, it's going to happen anyway. The next one is on the corrosion resistant coating. The best way of making sure that coating doesn't simply bubble up after 6 months is to have this is where the condition comes in, is have the coating material supplier and the coating applications person both give the owner a joint warranty. Then the material supplier knows this can get installed right. The installer knows that he's got good material, because they don't want to have to come back within the 5 to 10 year warranty period to repair the darn coating. And another, again, not that great of an increase in cost, but a very important mitigating factor so that you don't have a leak pass, the degradation of floors, walls, whatever. The other one is on the process tanks themselves is, I think I already mentioned this, is put a fume scrubber on it, but that's not enough by itself. The current code allows a generations old collection hood method that's been defined by the American Congress of Industrial Hygienists or something to that effect. And what I've found over the last 25, 30 years is that methodology only has a 50 to 80% collection efficiency. Now, the thing is, in 1985, the National Institute of Safety and Occupational Health did extensive work on collection efficiencies on metal finishing baths. And anyway, they came up with a high velocity capture through a narrow slot on and a push air on the other side. And they could get easily over 97% collection efficiency with less than half the actual volume, flow volume. So for half the capital equipment size, you can get from less than 80% collection efficiency to over 97, 98% collection efficiency. Then the fume scrubber does like a 99% removal. And so that's a significant odor mitigation measure. I don't know how else to state it. And there's companies that have done this. And again, I would encourage metal finishers, particularly because plating and anodized facilities, they have processes like anodize and various plating that creates a lot of mist, in the electrolytic process. Seattle Galvanizing doesn't have the electrolytic processes like that. So I'm only using this as an example. You can get 98, 99% collection efficiency on a chrome plating bath or a chromic acid anodizing bath, and keep it from even, keep it from going out, and having it fume scrub. There's basically not an odor issue within the building, let alone outside the building, is what I'm saying. So that's another important mitigation condition that the company will do. And don't know how else to say that. It's good. The other quick thing I wanted to catch here is that somehow there's a notion that there's hazardous materials processing, and this processing led into this CUP. Well, there's no hazardous materials being processed. They are in a dip tank, they're in a kettle, or they're confined in a bag house, or they're in the scrubber recirculation water. They're not being processed into a new form or chemical condition or anything like that. The only place where hazardous waste in particular is processed is at a licensed treatment, storage, and disposal facility. That's a RCRA defined facility that is usually placed in a heavy industrial area and has a permit from the state to receive and treat, process, and ship hazardous waste. That's not what this company is doing. They're not processing hazardous waste. Related to what I also said about the ventilation method, that's the same collection method used inside the kettle that evacuates a very good percentage of the emitted fumes. And the bag houses, again, regulated by the clean air agencies, has specific limits it has to live up to in order to be environmentally and neighbor friendly with regard to any odors. So anyway, I'm good at, so a couple other quick ones here. In regard to sewer discharge, well, there will be none. And even if there was a wastewater discharge, the water, sewer, and compliance and permitting and engineering costs to do so make that if any wastewater was generated, all those costs are to a point now where it makes more sense to put in a recycle system. And I've done a lot of those in the Puget Sound Basin. So, but in this particular case, they're not even generating the wastewater. So therefore it's not a permitting issue. During the design of the treatment tanks, particularly, there's a number of methods to reduce the volumes. One is to spray off the, you withdraw the parts from the process tank, then you use a hand spray wand to spray the chemicals back off the parts back into the process tank. And you're using the first rinse water to do that. Another way is to have double countercurrent rinses after each process tank. And then as the first rinse is being used up and making up for evaporation in the process tank, the second rinse is brought into it. So you're getting double use of the rinse tanks, and also you're spraying over those. Anyway, what I'm getting at, I won't belabor that anymore, is in the design process, it's with 100% engineering certainty, there would be no industrial wastewater surplus, either by discharge or by collection. There just won't be, because you've got evaporation and you're using volume reduction techniques. Tried and true. It's been proven in dozens of facilities here in the Puget Sound Basin. Let me just really quick here. The certificate of conditional no exposure. I've done that for facilities, several facilities. And the reason it hasn't been, quote, applied for is because you can't apply for it until all the features that meet the conditional certificate have to be designed, and for that matter, even built, because an ecology inspector isn't going to pour over a lot of plans and procedures and all that. They want to come out and actually see it, make sure it's practical and functional. So what happens is you can apply for the certificate online. They issue it based on conditions and known conditions. And then eventually a inspector comes out and makes sure you're complying with what the certificate requires. And there's a lot of methods used, and these also relate to the odor issue, but also the containment of materials. As an example, any grinding, cutting, whatever is going to be done inside under in a well ventilated and filtered discharge. And then the other thing is materials. This is kind of strange, but you got, almost all of the products they produce are given to a customer, and the customer installs them outdoors. But when it's on site, it can't contact stormwater. So go figure. Then it goes out and gets installed on a boat, a dock, or as a railing, or for that matter, even guardrails and lampposts that Cedar Woolley probably has in their town get installed outside. So anyway, so they're building this facility to have both raw materials and finished materials be stored inside. Now they got to get it out to a truck. So one of the ecology inspectors are all real smart about this, and they know that the forklifts will tend to track stuff from inside to the outside. Well, what you do is you have first you have a covered canopy over your loading dock. So some trucks you can load directly into trucks without the forklift going out into the parking lot. Well, where the parts are too big or the truck can't get up to the loading dock, what you do is you have one forklift on a pad outside that hasn't been exposed and run into inside. You have an inside forklift, takes it out and puts it on the drop-off pad. The outside forklift takes it from there to the truck. So anyway, there's a lot of other examples that with procedural, structural, a lot of ways to avoid the NPDES general stormwater permitting, which takes a long time to get. It's expensive. You got to do treatment systems out for stormwater, and it's just something that significant incentive to avoid that and just eliminate the problem at the sources, which is the highest priority. So that also helps eliminate the site runoff concerns. All you're going to have is a roof runoff and parking lot, just like any of the other businesses in that association they're already doing themselves. Let's see, solid waste here. We obviously haven't seen the comments that just came in earlier this morning, but it sounds like I think between regulations, design, permitting, you take that gamut. In my opinion, all issues are mitigated in the process, regulations, and just incentives to do a reasonable job. I guess we're pretty much there. If you've got any questions, let me know.
All right. And I got to think how I do this. If I want the other folks from the team to go first, and then you all answer questions. Maybe we'll do them kind of in order. All right. So, Mr. Allen, I appreciate the explanation of the differences between hazardous waste versus hazardous materials versus solid waste. That is helpful. Obviously, you have a lot of experiences with these issues, both from an engineering point of view and from a regulatory point of view. So that does kind of clarify things for me. I'm grateful for that. I understand your argument that hazardous waste will not be processed. However, it will be produced, at least in some amount. That seems clear as well. I think the staff report kind of already reflects that. That's the reason you're being pulled into the conditional use process in the first place, at least as I understand it. But given that you will be generating some hazardous waste, and I think I heard some dispute between you and Mr. Mirzai as to whether you would be a large or a small generator. If a small generator, I gather that the hazardous waste would be stored for 180 days. Is that correct?
Up to 180 days.
All right. As I understood Mr. Leo Jacobs' questions in Exhibit M, this was kind of his, final emails on this subject. He wanted to see, what the plan was for storing that stuff for up to 6 months and how much we would realistically be talking about and where it would be taken. I don't think I heard an answer to that in your testimony, and I don't think I've seen an answer to that in the site plans or in any of the reports. So what answer do you have now to these questions from Mr. Jacobs about how much waste, where's it going to be stored, where's it going to go?
Again, WAC 173-303 is real clear on all these, all your questions and my answers. Is that a small quantity generator is defined as generating no more than 220 pounds per calendar month and storing no more than 2,200 pounds at any given time. Now, to put that into perspective, 220 pounds is half of a 55-gallon barrel. 2,200 pounds is about 4 55-gallon barrels. So, I mean, it'd all be in the space in front of me, you know, at the very most. And again, the WAC requires it to be in a roofed, bermed, and with containment. And well, actually, a small quantity generator is basically exempt from the regulation, but nobody does that. That's got any common sense. They're still going to put it in a roofed, bermed area, and they're going to have a emergency contact list. They're going to do all the same things as a large quantity generator does, except for the extensive training plans and emergency procedures and all those kinds of things.
But Mr. Allen, where do I see this plan to provide the roofed bermed structure with the emergency contact lists and all of that stuff? Where do I see that plan? And more to the point, where does the city staff, such as Mr. Jacobs, who's ultimately going to be responsible for enforcing that, where does he see that in the proposal?
I think it's like you mentioned on some other things, it'd be in the permitting process, and they've got one of the conditions is to comply with all regulations. Well,
Mr. Jacobs's memo was pretty clear. He wanted to see that stuff at this stage of the permitting process, the conditional use phase. He did not want to see that deferred to the building permit phase. Is there any reason why we can't have the hazardous material storage and transportation plan at this phase?
Well, because what happens is what happens is if you focus on one part of the total facility, then it ends up as is the nature of engineers is to make it a lot bigger just to cover your tail later. Whereas if it's done as part of their design and the permitting phase, then it can all be integrated together. And the regulation is still there. You know, I don't know what else to tell you. It's just like other things. You know, one of them. One way of at least addressing the quantities aspect of it is in the hazardous material inventory statement is required by the fire code for an H occupancy. One section of that hazardous material inventory statement would be hazardous waste. So at least the quantities would be defined at the very earliest stages of the building permit process. It would be part of the submittal documents. The hazardous material inventory statement would also there's other staff people were concerned about the amount of byproducts and the amount of this, that, and the other that were stored on site. Hazardous material inventory statement will have those specific streams and materials, including its hazard class, where it's stored, the HMIS, well, the NFPA 704 colored diamond designations. It would have all this stuff that's more than the minimum required by regulation. So there you get quantities, locations, but when you start getting into the design details of a spilled collection area, and those are getting into final design details. And I'm hesitant to define sizes without doing a facility-wide holistic approach to it.
You said that you would recommend adding as a condition a tank pit as part of the spill containment. Did you mean to add that as a condition of approval here at the CUP phase?
No, the fact of having a tank pit itself doesn't need to be a condition. It's going to be again, like we were just talking about, as part of the design to meet the IFC regulations for an H occupancy. In order to reasonably comply with that, the tank pit is also the fire water suppression collection of 20 minutes of that collection water. So again, that's even a better example of where you do this holistic design to meet the regulatory requirements. And the regulatory requirements are your mitigation methods. And so the tank pits can become a normal design outcome of meeting various regulations, requirements for, like I say, fire water suppression, collection, cleaning, inspections for leaks. There's a number of requirements that make a tank pit an optimal way to design and construct a metal finishing facility.
But it strikes me that some of this controversy between the applicant and the staff could have been avoided if the applicant had put forward some of these ideas earlier in the process. Like, for example, this idea of the tank pit, for example, we're all hearing for the first time here at the public hearing. It's not in, kind of your operations plan that you supplied as part of Exhibit D. It's not anywhere on the site plans that you supplied in Exhibit J. It's very difficult for staff to review it and provide a good recommendation if they don't have these specific concepts in front of them. So I'm just wondering, and I don't want to harp on tank pit because this is true of every aspect of the project, but why are we only hearing about tank pit for the first time right now?
Well, when I'm choosing my words carefully. The other jurisdictions that I've done this kind of work in before have had previous companies of the same kind in their jurisdiction, so they can see them. And I know Cedar Woolley doesn't have very many metal finishers in their jurisdiction, so I wasn't much involved in the application and the SEPA and all that process. So I can only surmise that it's just a difference in experience level with this kind of industry. But I'm sure Cedar Woolley has some auto body repair and some paint shops and other places that generate hazardous waste and flammable ones, even at that, where this company doesn't have any flammable materials. So that's the best way I can explain it.
I guess I have some of the same questions for you then, Mr. Allen, on this concept of the fume scrubber, and you also described a particular type of hood, a collection hood. I think you called it a collection hood and a fume scrubber. Again, these sound great in concept, and you explained how good they are at extracting chemicals that may cause odors. Yet I don't see a fume scrubber or a collection hood in, your Exhibit D, which is kind of your explanation of how this facility's operations will go. I don't see it on any of the site plans. How is staff, or for that matter, the final decision maker on this application, how are we supposed to review your fume scrubber and your collection hood to satisfy ourselves that it will indeed achieve these odor control outcomes that you've talked about?
Well, there's a couple of ways of doing it. You just make it a flat out condition, but then that's not going to be specific enough as to what its design specification is. The other way you can do it is that fire department, the fire regulations give a fire chief authorization to require an applicant to hire an expert in what they perceive as a significant, or not necessarily significant, but a reasonable risk. So they can choose to have a professional engineer and a state licensed professional engineer, as I am, is bound by ethics and regulation to hold the public safety and health and safety as paramount. So whenever you put that stamp on a report, that's the mission, public health and safety. So that's another avenue. And the metal finishing facilities that I've worked on that are significantly larger and have much more, lack of a better term, hazardous materials and generation aspects, we don't even wait for we don't even wait for the fire chief to say it, because we know he's gonna ask it, because they've been down that road before. And we just generate the hazardous material inventory statement and this hazardous risk report all in its own professional engineering package and stamped, and it's a fairly lengthy document, 25-30 pages at least, plus attachments and more, even more. And so there's two avenues: an outright condition, or you require through the permitting process to hire experts.
At what phase in these other projects was this professional engineering report produced?
It was put into the permit application package because we knew it was going to be required anyway, so we just put it right in at the front.
But you didn't do that for this project?
Well, I guess not.
All right. I don't think I have any questions for Mr. Allen. Would the other members of the-
But the permit was, my understanding of the city is that the city is holding the permit until they get processing, until they get conditional use, the CUP approved. So they got the CUP before they can process the permit. So in a way, they got to get the CUP and then finalize their permit, because then if there's any new conditions, which is likely, then they need to modify their permit application package anyway. So I'm seeing kind of the horse and the cart flipping back and forth here.
Right. Yeah, there is always a certain amount of tension in these projects that involve multiple permits. What issues need to be addressed at what phase? And I think that's the tension that you're pointing to right now. All right. As I said, I don't have any questions for Mr. Allen. Would other members of the applicant team like to testify?
Yeah. Hadi, is it all right if I speak?
Wait, I'm sorry, who is talking right now?
My name is Robert Power, and I'm the construction manager for Seattle Galvanize.
All right. Can I get a thumbs up from the president here? Is Mr. Power testifying for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Mr. Robert Power, will you go ahead and raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give here today will be the truth?
Okay.
I do.
And can you spell your name for the audio record, please?
ROBERTPOWER.
And what again was your role with the project?
I'm with Seacon. We're the construction management team managing the design and construction of the facility.
Seacon, SEACON?
SEACON.
Got it. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Power.
Brief background for myself. I've been with the company approximately 40 years, and we are an industrial contractor, design, build, and so this is not the first time we've been involved in a project like this. We were actually the construction manager on the facility in Arlington as well. And I'll be brief. I just want to maybe condense some of what you've heard so far today. As I think you've heard, this facility does not produce hazardous materials. It produces a byproduct of this is waste that is regulated by 173303 as a small waste generator. And I would again reemphasize the point that Greg Allen has made, is that a lot of the information that you may be requesting today has started to be developed in our building permit application, but we have been specifically directed to not submit, or the city will not review the building permit application until the CUP is complete. And I again agree with Mr. Allen. A lot of the details that we're discussing today, such as how the bag house will operate, odor collection, containment pits, are all part of a building application. Odor discharge, I just want to clarify a significant difference between Arlington and the facility in Sedro-Woolley. To go back to Ms. McGowan's point, they don't keep the doors open in Arlington, it is an open air facility. The walls are 30% open in that environment. It is a completely different operation in terms of the scope and the magnitude of what takes place. In the Cedro-Woolley facility, from the beginning, it has been clear that everything that takes place related to the galvanizing operation will occur inside the building and are subject to the regulations. And I have no experience with the Clean Air Agency in your jurisdiction, but I do have experience with Puget Sound air quality, and they do in fact have strict regulations regarding odor. I can speak to previous projects whose odor generations at their original location were significantly greater than this and were controlled through odor collecting facilities to the point of being able to stand outside a rendering plant and not know it was there inside. Stormwater, I just wanted to touch on briefly. All of the operations related to stormwater discharge, I would argue that we are creating a cleaner environment at the completion of this project than what currently exists today. The site is gravelled. It is considered a impervious surface by Department of Ecology. We will be reducing the amount of surface area that's subject to vehicular traffic by putting a roof over it. There will be no loading or unloading or handling of materials outside the facility. The last comment I think I've got, just to clarify, this goes back to Sunset Park. I just want to be clear that that this facility and the surrounding property owned by Seattle Galvanizing is a member of the Sunset Park, probably their largest landowner, and I would submit that they are subject to the rules that exist among themselves as members of the Sunset Park. I'm not sure how that fits into the permitting. So that's all I had to say.
All right, thank you, Mr. Power. That's very helpful. Thank you as well, Mr. Allen. I do appreciate hearing from our engineers. Mr. Mirzai, do we have anyone else from the applicant team?
Hello.
Was that a no?
No, nothing from us.
No.
We're
Okay.
good.
All right, I think that is it from the applicant team. We will turn now to members of the public. See how we shall handle the calling of folks. Maybe put your hand up and I will call on you, and then you can take yourself off mute. So would any members of the public like to testify today? All right, I see a couple of hands going up. The first one I saw, I think, is labeled Hannah on my screen. All right. Ma'am, are you interested in testifying this morning? I cannot hear you, ma'am. Can you say that again, please? I am still not able to hear Hannah. I can see your lips moving, so I know you're talking, but I cannot hear you. Can you try one more time?
My speaker output says it's going.
I just heard you say that your speaker output isn't showing, so whatever you did is now working. I think I can hear you. Well, it cut out again. Can you do another test audio, please, ma'am? You know what I'll do? Hannah, why don't you put yourself on mute and you can tinker with your computer. We'll go ahead and move on to the next person. I had a hand raised. The screen name is Tanya1. So will Tanya1 take yourself off of mute? All right. Good morning, ma'am. Are you interested in testifying this morning?
Yes.
All right. Will you go ahead and raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Will you state and spell your name for the record, please?
Tanya Sparks. TANYA-SPARKS.
All right. Go ahead with your testimony, please, Ms. Sparks.
I'm a longtime resident that lives in the area behind the planned facility. and I would like to oppose the facility. This is not in my opinion, an appropriate place to place such a potentially toxic and noisy facility. It's surrounded by children and pets. Wild animals reside within miles of, literally within a mile of the facility. And any potential runoff can be dangerous to those things. And I know that the applicant has done a good job explaining how they plan to mitigate that, but they still haven't addressed how they will mitigate the noise of the trucks. And will they be coming in the middle of the night? There are homes directly beside the facility and kitty corner to it where people work from home like myself and elderly who are home all day retired. And the road behind my home, Rhodes Road, will not sustain heavy trucks. It's eroding, and these are concerns that I have as a neighbor. This is not a good place to put this type of plant.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sparks. Please put yourself back on mute. The next hand I saw go up was Stuart, screen name Stuart. Go ahead and activate your microphone, please.
Hello.
Sir, are you planning to testify today?
Yes, please.
Will you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give here today will be the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Will you state and spell your name for the audio record, please?
Stuart Skelton, S-T-U-A-R-T, Skelton, S-K-E-L-T-O-N.
Go ahead with your testimony, Mr. Skelton.
Okay, I'm one of the owners of Riverside Health Club, which shares a property line with the proposed project, or at least the former Snelson portion of that. I'm unclear on whether their proposed expansion or not expansion, but the proposed project comes around the corner and actually joins our property, but it is in very close proximity to us. One of our biggest concerns was the odor emissions and the toxic chemical emissions that are known to come from this type of plant. I have a friend who is in the metal fabrication business in Arlington and uses Seattle galvanizing periodically there, and he has informed me that there is a lot of noxious odor coming from that plant. And we've also heard from the city staff that on their visit, that was a problem, and that specifically at the adjacent buildings, the adjacent property owners. And this really concerns us. We do have a metal building. You know, the applicant has talked about protective coatings within their facility to protect them, but I don't see that that is able to protect any of the adjacent buildings. We're also in the health club business. We are Riverside Health Club. Our members are exercising in our building, and to have noxious fumes in the vicinity just does not seem conducive to that. Or across the parking lot from us is a physical therapist. They have people with compromised health coming in there. That seems like a problem situation there also. We just have a lot of concern about this facility being able to contain the vapors that come from toxic chemicals. I know that they've stated that they produce no hazardous waste, but they are using hazardous materials in the processing of the parts that they are producing. And that does put off noxious fumes. We're concerned about that. You know, there's the situation in Arlington where those noxious fumes are present. I think that the good predictor of the future is the present, and those things haven't been resolved in Arlington. I don't have confidence that they will be here. I think that's all I have to say. I'm open to questions.
I have no questions for you, Mr.
Okay.
Skelton. Thank you for your testimony. Will you go ahead and
Thank
put yourself back on mute? All right. The next hand that I saw go up was screen name Sandra D. Zeiber. Ma'am, will you take yourself off mute, activate your microphone?
Oh, all right. Hi.
All right, I am getting a little bit of echo. We'll see how the audio is. Ma'am, will you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you give here today will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Will you state and spell your name for the audio record, please?
We're gonna turn the other computer down.
Oh, thank you. That may help with some of the interference. Will you
Yeah.
state and spell your name for the audio record, please?
Sandra Dawn Zeber. Sondra Zieber.
Thank you. Go ahead with your testimony, please.
I live directly behind the proposed facility. I run a small family farm called B&Z Farm. We have a U-Pick pumpkin patch where kids and families come all month in October. Year round, I raise cows for beef, pigs for pork, chickens for chicken, and also eggs. The concern I have is any kind of runoff. There's a lot of clay in our backfield. Clay, as we know, does not let water drain. Therefore, any runoff or anything that might accumulate over this way, my animals are going to be drinking that. Not only that, the wildlife that comes into my backfield, which is 500 feet away from their proposed area. We have bald eagles that come in. We have red-tailed gray hawks come in. We have swans, ducks, deer, lots of wildlife. The proposed site is just, it's really close to residential and farmland. Right across the way of Rhodes Road is where they grow vegetables, cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, spinach, corn. There's just a lot of farmland within a really close area, proximity to the building site location that's proposed. I think that's it.
All right, ma'am. Thank you very much for your testimony. Please put yourself back on mute. The next hand that I see up is Hannah again. Let's see if we've resolved our computer issues. Ma'am, will you activate your microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, that's much better. Will you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you give here today will be true?
Yes.
Thank you. Will you state and spell your name for the audio record, please?
Yes. Hannah Moran, HANNAH MORAN.
Go ahead with your testimony, please, Ms. Moran.
Yes. So I would just like to clear up and read a few things from the Sunset Owners Association bylaws. These were filed with the city of Sedro-Woolley on June 10th, 1994. In section 4.3, architectural control, no permanent building, structure, or fence shall be placed or erected upon any lot, tract, or parcel of said property if its construction does not conform to City of Sedro-Woolley building code and uniform building code, state of Washington, etc. And moves on to section 4.4, approval of plans, general requirements, all plans for the construction of private roads and driveways, and all building plans for any building, fence, wall, or structure to be erected upon any lot, and landscaping plans and any changes after approval thereof, any remodeling, reconstruction, alteration, or addition to any building, road, driveway, or other structure upon any lot in such premises shall require the approval in writing of the Architectural Committee of the Sunset Park Owners Association. It does go on to note that there is preliminary approvals, persons or associations who anticipate constructing improvements upon the land within Sunset Industrial Park, whether they already own the lands in the same or are contemplating to own the land or lot, to contemplating the purchase of a lot, may submit preliminary sketches of such improvement to the Architectural Committee. And it does go on to list in section 4.7 landscaping requirements. Sites fronting on Sunset Park Drive shall maintain a landscape buffer of at least 10 feet from the face of the curb, except for ingress/egress points. The minimum landscape buffer may include right-of-way areas, provided they're landscaped and maintained. Sites fronting on Maple Street or Rhodes Road shall maintain a landscape buffer of at least 10 feet measured from the property line. And that is just that particular portion. Those are available as far as the covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Sunset Industrial Park. If you would like that, a copy of that as well. I did have a specific question, I guess, to the city planning. Does or will the city require the condition of 500 pounds per year as stated by Seattle Galvanizing Company in the SEPA response to be actualized by annual air quality reports or emissions reports to the city? And if they do not adhere to the 500 pounds per year, will the permit be revoked or will there be fines upon the company, is a question that I have. On there. And I think I would just like to also mention in one of the answers, specifically 5C of the SEPA checklist, no evidence of any animal migration through the site was the answer given. When, in my opinion, it is very obvious that the trumpeter swans do migrate specifically through Skagit County and over Sunset Park Drive every morning. If you are out here, like our guys are loading their vans here on Sunset Park Drive every morning, we do see the ducks and the trumpeter swans overhead, fly overhead. And as for the use of the pond potentially not being there if there was no human there to build it, it was built in 1994, almost 30 years ago. So the ducks, geese, swans, deer, and other wildlife have been using that location for over 30 years. Whether or not humans dug that pond.
And Ms. Moran, is that pond the stormwater control pond that we heard Mr. Coleman describe earlier? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right.
And it does have the park attached to it.
Say again that last part, please.
The Surge Pond does have a park attached to it as well. It's the Bill Snelson Memorial Park that is located in the Sunset Park Industrial Park.
Okay, thank you. You had a question from me. Would I like a copy of the bylaws? I think the answer is no. I see bylaw compliance as a private affair between the members of the association. That's not to say they don't have to do whatever the bylaws say. I'm not taking any position on the bylaws. That being the case, I don't believe that I myself need to read them. You then had a question directed at city staff. Would the 500 pounds per year described in the SEPA checklist be made a condition? City staff is not required to answer questions from the public, but I will leave it up to them whether they want to answer that question once we are finished with public testimony. So with that, thank you, Ms. Moran, for your testimony. Please put yourself back on mute, and I will see if there's anyone else who wants to testify.
Sorry, Alex, we got a quick question here. It's Milo from Seattle Galvanizing.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so the 500 pounds of exactly what?
Ms. Moran, can we put you back on, and can you direct the applicant to the source of your 500-pound question, please? I believe I heard you say, Ms. Moran, that you saw it in the SEPA checklist. So if you can give us a more precise citation for that, like maybe like a specific question number in the checklist. And just in the interest of time, Ms. Moran, while you're working on that, go ahead and mute yourself. I'll see if there's anyone else who wants to testify. Then we will come back to Ms. Moran, and maybe she can show the applicant what she was talking about. I do see a hand going up here. It appears to be from Ms. Sparks. I don't normally allow multiple opportunities to testify. Ms. Sparks, is there some issue going on? Why don't you take yourself off mute?
I would just like to also point out that the city planning department themselves still seem concerned. And Nicole even had admitted that she felt pressured to have this public comment period. I feel that should stem into your decision, as it seems though they evaded, she used the word evade in the beginning to answer some of these questions. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Ms. Sparks. Again, I'm not going to allow multiple opportunities for public comment. And I heard the same testimony that you did. So there's no reason to reiterate testimony from other folks. I see Ms. Moran. Apparently she has found her citation. Ms. Moran, why don't you take yourself off mute and tell us what you were looking at? No audio here, Ms. Moran, not hearing you.
Oh, sorry about that. It's starts on page 4 of 16. Question 2A states what types of emissions to the air would result from the proposal during construction, operation, and maintenance when the project is completed. If any, generally describe and give approximate quantities if known. The answer given was once complete, fume emission from the galvanizing kettle will be present. The primary pollutant is particulate matter, fume from galvanizing process, which will be controlled by a baghouse. Emissions of particulate matter should be less than 500 pounds a year. See attached report, Seattle Galvanizing Company, Inc., Sedro-Woolley project.
All right, thank you, Ms. Moran. And again, I will leave it up to the city whether they want to answer that question. And of course, the applicant also has the opportunity to answer or rebut anything that they've heard. Put yourself back on mute, please, Ms. Moran. And is there anyone else who has not already testified who would like to do so at this time? I'm not seeing any further hands go up. Someone is with Ms. Moran at the same physical location. Go ahead and take yourself off mute. Yes, sir. Are you?
Yes, this is Edward Clark.
All right, Mr. Clark, will you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that your testimony today will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Will you state and spell your name for the audio record, please?
Edward Clark, EDWARD CLARK.
Go ahead with your testimony, Mr. Clark.
The galvanizing plant will impact the quality to the surrounding community. Our kids play at the Winnie Hauser Park, Cook Road play fields, Sedro-Woolley football field, the Bingham Park, And there is a proposed new school off of Hodgins Street. We have one of the largest migration fly zones. We all know that. Birds are stopping in the fields and nesting in the cornfields to the south of the galvanizing plant. The Skagit River is a half a mile to the south. There is farmland and a proposed organic farm on the Rhodes Road. So residential wise, they stated that there was only one residential mobile home park to the east of their property, which in turn there is residential to the north, south, the east, and the west of their property. They didn't answer that question very truthfully. We've got 500 new apartments coming on the Hodgins Street, 105 condos, Hoosier Farms property, 60 apartments off the trail road, a 50-unit hotel off the trail road. All are less than a half a mile away. I mean, I wouldn't want to rent a 3 or 4 story apartment and not be able to open my window. So we've got the Riverside Health Club, Cedar Valley Physical Therapy. How are these businesses being affected? Are they going to lose half of their, business? So in conclusion, I'm strongly against the facility, and I think it will destroy our little town. I think I will be forced to sell my building after being here for 30 years and move my company out of Sedro-Woolley if emissions and environmental impact are as bad as the Arlington plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Please put yourself back on mute. All right. Would anyone else like to testify? I don't see any hands at this time. So if there's anyone who is trying to testify, just go ahead and activate your mic and blurt it out. I don't want to miss anybody due to technical problems. And give one moment for folks to respond to that. Activate microphones and start talking, folks, if you'd like to be heard. Still not seeing any responses. Do we have anyone who has called in by phone whom I might not be able to see as part of this Zoom meeting? I don't hear any response to that either. All right. So unless someone was having technical difficulties, and if they were, we'll address it. I'm going to go ahead and stop the public testimony portion. We will turn now back to the applicant to respond to anything that they may have heard during public testimony. And I'd also like to give the city an opportunity to come on at the very end. Or maybe, you know what, since it's the applicant's burden of persuasion here for a CUP, let's go ahead and do the city first, and then we'll give the very last word today to the applicant. So Ms. McGowan, can we have you back on, please?
Yes, sir.
All right. So Ms. McGowan, did you hear anything in either the applicant's testimony or the public testimony that you would like to respond to?
Well, the general feeling towards this from all the public comments we've received here, we agree. There are a lot of things that the single family housing out there, multifamily, the hotels, we were well aware of that. We only mentioned the single family houses to the east, just simply because that was part of the public comment from Paul Woodmassey. We understand that there's much more than that. So all things considered, I do want to say that Hannah Moran, your comment on the 500 pounds per square foot, we aren't going to respond to that at this time. That's something that we look at the building permit. And we want a little bit more information before we go ahead and make any decisions with how we're going to handle that. So no comment on that at this time. But
all right. I think I heard you say just now, Ms. McGowan, that there's more residential in the surrounding area than perhaps was indicated. So in the site plan, at least, I'm sorry, not the second, in the staff report, at least on page 3, there's a section about comp plan designations, zoning designations, and existing land uses of the site and surrounding areas. Looking at that, I don't see any mention of residential anywhere nearby. North, south, east, and west, it's all industrial. But now I'm hearing you say that there perhaps is some residential nearby. What can you tell me?
Yes, that table that you see in the staff report, those are just specific to adjacent properties.
Okay.
So there is single family residential adjacent to the east side. But there are, as Edward Clark was mentioning, within, a mile or so, there are other single family and multifamily housing out there too.
I see, that's clear. And yes, I do now see the adjacent single family to the east. Okay, thank you. So Ms. McGowan, have you heard anything from either the applicant or from the public that would change your recommendation that this application be approved?
With all of the things that have just kind of been left unanswered, especially with Leo Jacobs and his and the Skagit County Health Department's concerns on hazardous waste and how those things haven't been laid out here at this time, though they've been asked for at this phase of the permitting process. We're hesitant to approve this. With all of the public testimony in general opposition. Yeah, we are very hesitant to approve this.
Thank you, Ms. McGowan. Do you have anything else you want to add? And Mr. Coleman, I see your hand up, so we'll turn to you in a moment. Anything further, Ms. McGowan?
Nothing further from me.
Going to be testifying.
Let's go ahead and put Mr. Coleman on. Yes, sir. Is there anything that you heard during either the applicant testimony or the public testimony or Ms. McGowan's testimony just now that you would like to address?
So there are some things I'd like to address from the applicant's testimony. I appreciate Mr. Greg Allen's testimony. I think a lot of what he said was very helpful. It's also illustrative of the lack of information that we've received. A lot of the information that he provided, and as the hearing examiner recognized during the testimony, is information that was not presented in writing nor in pre-app or any written verbal form until just today. So that makes it very challenging for staff to be able to make a recommendation or even properly condition a project. We made an attempt to put many conditions on, largely because it did feel like we were lacking information. There was no mention before of the air scrubbers. They previously said that the chemical in the vats never gets spent. That was tested, I believe that was in their written or verbal comments at some point in the past, but maybe not today. While today, Mr. Allen testified that those chemical vats will eventually be spent and have to be changed out, the chemicals in those. Now, if that's not accurate, I'm only gauging by the information that he provided today in his testimony, which is all new testimony to staff. There was, it just, like I said, this is illustrative of how we receive information in bits and pieces, sometimes verbally. I would like to point out that we have asked consistently for a comprehensive facility-wide plan that addresses what the potential impacts and potential mitigation factors will be. And some of Mr. Allen's testimony was that, well, of course we're going to be doing these things because federal or state laws require us to do so, and we don't want to get in trouble with those higher authorities. But yet that type of information was not reflected in their written record. Again, very challenging for staff to ask for something and then be told, oh, yeah, of course, we're going to take care of that. There was no discussion of the forklift operations that was discussed in detail, transferring materials using 2 different forklifts so as not to bring materials from inside to the outside. These sound like facility operations data that should be in this conditional use permit application. So we have the ability to say, oh, okay, we understand that you're going to be addressing these issues. But we've asked to address noise. We've asked to address chemicals, odors, waste handling, and I won't go over all the things that we've requested. And yet we're just getting leaked bits and pieces. Some of the comments were a little eye-raising in that the applicant seems to be stating that it's the onus of the city to ask the proper questions before they'll answer whether or not they're going to be complying with those questions. And I do understand that a lot of these questions need to be addressed at a later time as the more detailed operations of the actual plant, vat sizes and quantities and is still designed. But we've consistently asked for a discussion of how those impacts are going to be addressed, and we haven't received those answers when asked point blank. We still think that a comprehensive facility-wide plan is necessary, and we've asked for that in the conditions. I am concerned after hearing testimony today that the conditions as we've written them may not be stringent enough to get all of the information. Mr. Allen's testimony raised a lot of eyebrows and created questions in our head. And some of the things that he addressed, such as the air scrubbers for the vats, do not exist at the Arlington plant. It's all just, at that plant, there's no capture of those vapors. It's an open air facility, as Mr. Power testified. And so that air is just carried out into the community. I believe they're implying that they're going to have scrubbers in our facility, in the Cedar Woolley facility, should be approved. And that's very good to hear, but that's not in the written testimony. The one thing that we have asked in the past is, the orange residue, or we're not clear if it's residue or dust or if it's chemical reaction causing nearby materials to turn orange. We've asked why that happens, and we have not received a clear answer. So that is one thing that we think is important to address. If it is entirely scrubbed indoors and we don't have that issue, then as long as we don't have the issue, that is the concern. I think that's it for my follow-up, and thank you for the opportunity to speak further after hearing from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. And I have just one final question for you. What would you recommend I do in terms of a decision on this CUP application?
That puts me in a challenging position because I think there's still more information to be learned. I think it's important for there to be a comprehensive facility-wide discussion of the noise, the odor. We've asked for that. We've experienced resistance from the applicant to put it in a cohesive document. We're just learned today about more operations that they intend to do, which are good, and I think could make the impacts of this plant tenable to the community or mitigated. But without knowing that those in place, I'm hesitant to make a recommendation for approval. But I think if the applicant can demonstrate through through documentation that is not in multiple pieces, but in one comprehensive document that addresses all of the things that we've been discussing and other requirements that are either ours or Northwest Clean Air Agency or state solid waste or whatever, addressed comprehensively so that the community can see what they're doing to make sure that we don't have orange residue on neighboring properties. I think it is when hearing from Stuart, the owner of the adjacent Riverside Health Club, it did strike me as, if there are air quality problems and people are recreating and working out right next door, is it fair to those people to be having air quality problems at that facility? So it seems more imperative than ever to have a comprehensive facility plan before we can make a strong recommendation of approval. So I don't know how the timing of that works. It seems like the hearing examiner may or may not be interested in knowing the extent of that facility plan before it's approved. But ultimately, I understand that that's going to be a staff requirement to approve that. It's a long answer to, I don't know how to answer your question. I don't want to say this facility shouldn't be built, but we have a lot of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. That's very helpful. All right, I think that's everybody from the city. So now we will turn to the applicant for the last word. And that is because, as I said, it is the applicant's burden to demonstrate that this proposal complies with all the relevant codes and the CUP approval criteria. So applicant, this is your chance to answer any of the testimony that you just heard from the public, and especially the testimony that you just heard from Ms. McGowan and Mr. Coleman here at the end. And I would also like to ask you, what do you think should happen next in terms of proceedings? So why don't you go ahead, applicant team?
Great, I'll start. I'll answer Mr. Coleman.
All right, I'm sorry, who is speaking now from the applicant?
Greg Allen.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Allen. Mr. Coleman used the terms of, comprehensive impacts, and know that before, before going ahead. I think all the impacts we've heard from both public testimony and impacts that we've heard from the city illustrate to me, from my experience with pre-app meetings all the way through the process of these much larger and more impactful facilities, is that there doesn't seem to, from my perspective, to be sufficient understanding of what an industrial zone means. And that prior to designating the area in industrial zoning, a lot of these kinds of things should have been defined, mitigated, or made conditions as part of the building permit process. I ran into this quite a bit back in particularly the 90s, early 2000s in the city of Seattle. They had these big elaborate tables of uses to locations within the city of Seattle. And they'd go, well, they decided that metal finishing had odors, therefore put it in the most heavy industrial zone. Well, they don't belong there. And it was arbitrary.
So it takes some knowledge of land use, planning and zoning process to understand what all the different impacts are for the different zones. And then that's why we have zoning, is to hit impacts and also to what the adjacent land use is. And to hold this up, to come up with some kind of, as you use the word, comprehensive impacts things, is something that should have been done in the zoning when this was zoned industrial zoning. So I can't, my experience in these facilities, and particularly knowing that well over 95% of these metal finishing owners are good neighbors. The ones that aren't, are bad neighbors, they don't survive. They don't stay in business. My clients, I found them all to be good neighbors. And if there's a problem, work it out, get it done with, deal with it and get it done. If there are, and like I say, there's some that are, not just down the street a little bit of homeowners, but some that are just like, say, right behind, and they work together if there's an issue. And there's rarely any issues because it's a good business practices. But anyway, getting back to the Mr. Coleman, I'll just summarize it that I hear them about their level of understanding of the impacts of this kind of business. But I say they need to have a better understanding of what industrial zoning is and what those are allowed. If not, then they better be doing a lot more additional support regulations for that particular zoning, so that somebody like Seattle Galvanizing doesn't come in under the what's in hand and then have a different viewpoint later. So anyway, what I know about all this, I don't see any reason why this shouldn't be approved. Go ahead and they'll be a good neighbor. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Allen. Anyone else closing remarks from applicant team? Mr. Power, I see your hand up, so we'll call on you
Yes,
next.
thank you. Yeah, I'm going to gather from this today that I think the majority of the issues have been addressed, with the exception of odor or particulate discharge. And my experience has been that typically the systems that are put in place to ensure that happens are vetted during the permit process. And if there is anything that comes out of today that I think would change, for anybody's reason, the approval of this cup should really be limited to dealing with those two issues and making sure that the governing agency for that, which is the Air Quality Agency, has an opportunity to review what we're doing, which I believe is something that the city has required as a condition of the permit. So I think substantively within the conditions that have been stated by the city for approval, that there is adequate controls within the cup to allow the permitting process to continue.
Anything further, Mr. Powell?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Anything further from any other member of the applicant team?
Yes, this is Milo here with Seattle Galvanizing. Just to kind of conclude, so here in Arlington, we've been here since 2014. We have neighbors, both to the north, east, south, and west. None of them have packed up and left for whatever reasons. All of them are still here. We get along with all of them, and we work as a community. So with that said, to put it in perspective, I think what's happening is that the city did a walkthrough of the facility. You kind of look at a 45-foot kettle, with how the facility was built. And then, to kind of put that in perspective to Cedar Woolley, we're looking at a 10-foot kettle. So less than a quarter of the size. That facility is just meant for small piece galvanizing, so your nuts and bolts. You know, you're not gonna have heavy truckloads. You know, just to address some questions by Ms. Sparks. Hours of operation, Snelson operated out of that site. You know, I'm sure there was no issues with neighbors there. So none of that changes. Yeah, where we see it is, you know, we want to come in and do something good for the economy, especially in Cedro Lilly with hiring, you know, employees, developing the economic growth there. So how we see it in our viewpoint, we're trying to do something good, whereas people are stepping up and, you know, voicing their concerns, which is their right. But yeah, so we'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you, sir. Anything further from any member of the applicant team? All right, I see and hear no responses from the applicant team. So with that, I think we will close the record. I thank you all for your testimony today. Extremely helpful from all parties, our engineers, our planning staff. Everyone has done a great job with reviewing this, and I think I have a clear sense of the issues. I want to thank the members of the public for coming out. The testimony was extremely helpful. I can tell you guys have put a lot of thought into this. Both in the written comments and in your testimony today, I thought you all expressed yourselves very clearly, and I think I understand the issues that the public has presented. All right, so the ball is now in my court to produce a written decision and disseminate it to the city and the applicant. And I believe the city will actually handle the dissemination. So I'll send it to staff. They'll send it out to the applicant and other parties of record. So with that, thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you, Alex.